the nephew who became the king of pop. There's a photograph that circulates every June. A boy, no older than 12, sitting in front of a television, his face frozen somewhere between confusion and disbelief. The headline behind him says everything the boy himself can't yet process. Michael Jackson is dead. That boy grew up to wear his uncle's rhinestone glove on a movie set. What does it take to become the person the whole world already thinks it knows? Stay with this one. By the end, you'll understand why some people in that family still can't watch the trailer without crying. A childhood inside the legend. Jaafar Jackson was born in the summer of 1996, the son of Jermaine Jackson, one of the original Jackson 5, which meant that Uncle Michael wasn't a poster on a wall. He was a real person who showed up at family gatherings, who hosted game nights, who let his nephews and nieces run wild through the grounds of Neverland Ranch, chasing each other past amusement rides most kids only saw in commercials. Think about that for a second. While the rest of the planet was debating whether Michael Jackson was the greatest entertainer alive or a tabloid punchline, this kid was just trying to beat his cousins at hide and seek. What do you think that does to a person's sense of who Michael actually was, the icon or the uncle? By the time Jaafar was not quite 13, that uncle was gone. Cardiac arrest, June 25, 2009, at a rented home in Los Angeles. The world stopped that afternoon. Radio stations went quiet, television networks tore up their schedules, and millions of people who had never met Michael Jackson found themselves grieving as if they had. For a preteen boy who actually knew him, who had actual memories of him laughing over a board game, that kind of public mourning must have felt like a strange, distorted mirror. Everyone else was losing an icon. He was losing family. An unlikely casting call. Here's something that might surprise you. Jaafar Jackson never set out to be an actor. He dabbled in music, a couple of independent singles released in the years before the audition that came to define his life. But stepping into a biopic, let alone playing the most scrutinized entertainer of the 20th century, wasn't part of any 5-year plan. So how does a family member end up cast in the role of a lifetime? Director Antoine Fuqua, known for gritty, unglamorous dramas rather than musical spectacle, took over the long-gestating Michael Jackson biopic project and needed someone who could do more than lip-sync and moonwalk. He needed someone who could disappear into the role physically, vocally, and emotionally. Multiple actors were reportedly considered before Fuqua landed on the idea of casting inside the family itself. The resemblance, by every account, was uncanny. Not just the cheekbones or the voice, but something harder to name. A gentleness in how Jaafar carried himself that people who'd known Michael recognized instantly. According to accounts from the production, an early screen test convinced everyone in the room. Jaafar answered questions in character, channeling Michael's soft-spoken cadence so precisely that people watching reportedly needed a moment to collect themselves afterward. Would you want that job? Think about it. Not just memorizing lines, but having to relearn how another human being moved through the world, all while that human being happened to be your own flesh and blood. 2 years of becoming someone else. Preparing for the role reportedly consumed close to 2 years of Jaafar's life. This wasn't simply about learning choreography, although the choreography alone was a mountain to climb. Michael Jackson's most iconic routines are technically brutal, built on decades of rehearsal most people never see. Jaafar reportedly studied archival footage relentlessly, breaking down every hip rotation, every hesitation, every moment where Michael let the music dictate his body instead of the other way around. But the physical work might have been the easier half. Capturing Michael Jackson's voice, that instantly recognizable blend of falsetto, breathiness, and precision, required Jaafar to essentially rebuild his own vocal instrument. The finished film reportedly blends Jaafar's live vocal performances with restored recordings of Michael himself, stitching uncle and nephew together into a single sound. And then there was the interior work, the part nobody can see on a trailer. Jaafar has spoken about digging into Michael's personal writings, the notes and affirmations Michael reportedly kept close, including his well-documented fascination with positive thinking and manifestation. Understanding that belief system, Jaafar has said, changed how he understood his uncle entirely, not as a performer switching on charisma for the cameras, but as someone whose confidence was, in some sense, a discipline he practiced daily. Here's a question worth sitting with. How do you separate imitation from understanding? Jaafar has been fairly open that his goal was never an impersonation. He didn't want the dancing to overshadow the acting, or the acting to overshadow the dancing. He wanted the whole person to show up, flaws and brilliance together. Whether audiences agree he pulled that off is something we'll get to. A role that never stopped weighing on him. By his own description, the responsibility of the role never lifted, not for a single day of production. Every gesture carried weight beyond the scene being filmed. Every note he sang wasn't just a performance choice. It was a decision about how his family's most famous member would be remembered by a generation of viewers who never saw Michael Jackson perform live. That's an enormous amount of pressure to carry into your first significant acting role. Most actors get the luxury of separating themselves from the character when the cameras stop rolling. Jaafar didn't get that luxury. This character shared his last name, his blood, his family's private grief. Family members who visited the set or watched early footage reportedly struggled to separate memory from performance. Some described moments where it genuinely became difficult to tell whether they were watching Jaafar or seeing Michael himself again. That's about as high a compliment as a performance can earn. And also, if you think about it, a genuinely strange experience for people who are simultaneously grieving and witnessing a kind of resurrection. The film itself, the biopic titled simply Michael, eventually reached theaters in the spring of 2026 after a long and, at times, turbulent production history. The release date shifted more than once, and reports suggested the film was originally envisioned as a much longer, two-part project before being trimmed down into a single feature running just over 2 hours. The finished film focuses on Michael's rise, his childhood in Gary, Indiana, the grueling Jackson 5 years, the emergence of a solo superstar through Off the Wall, Thriller, and Bad, and it closes on a triumphant note, ending with a celebrated London concert from the late 1980s rather than continuing into the more difficult, contested decades that followed. Critics have noted this creative choice keeps the film squarely in the territory of celebration rather than reckoning, and reactions have been mixed on whether that's an honest artistic decision or a deliberate dodge of harder questions. What do you think? Should a biopic like this address the full, complicated record? Or is it fair for a story to end where the family wants it to end? Whatever your answer, the consensus on Jaafar's performance itself has been remarkably consistent. Even critics skeptical of the film's approach have singled him out, describing his dancing and stage presence as something close to uncanny. For a first-time film actor stepping into arguably the most impossible role in modern entertainment history, that's no small feat. What the family carried, it's worth pausing here and remembering what this film actually represents for the people who lived through June 2009. Firsthand, not as a headline but as a phone call in the middle of the day. Michael's mother, Catherine, was at the hospital when doctors made the announcement final. In the years that followed, by multiple family accounts, she became something like the emotional anchor for Michael's 3 children, who came to live under her care in the immediate aftermath. Decades later, watching her grandson recreate her son on screen reportedly moved her to tears. She has spoken about moments during filming and screenings where the line between Jaafar and Michael simply dissolved for her. Michael's siblings each carried the loss differently. Some leaned into public tribute, continuing to perform his songs on stage for years afterward, treating the music itself as a form of ongoing conversation with their brother. Others withdrew from the spotlight almost entirely, choosing to grieve privately rather than in front of cameras. A few gave raw, emotional interviews in the immediate aftermath that captured, in real time, just how unprepared even a famous family can be for a loss like this one. And then there were Michael's own children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket, who were 12, 11, and 7 years old, respectively, when their father died. All 3 grew up largely under Catherine and Joe Jackson's care, shielded as much as possible from the intensity of public scrutiny, even as their father's death became one of the most exhaustively covered news events of the decade. Paris, in particular, delivered a public tribute at the memorial service that's remembered as one of the rawest, most unguarded moments of grief ever broadcast to a global audience. An 11-year-old, live on television, trying to describe what her father meant to her. If you had to guess, which member of that family do you think had the hardest adjustment in the years that followed? The children who lost a father, or the siblings who lost a brother while sharing his profession? There's no right answer, but it's worth thinking about how differently public and private grief can unfold within the very same family. Why this story still resonates. Nearly 2 decades on, it would have been easy for interest in Michael Jackson's life to fade the way most celebrity stories eventually do. Instead, the opposite happened. His music remains a fixture on radio and streaming platforms. New generations discover Thriller and Billie Jean the same way earlier generations did. Through repetition, through cultural osmosis, through parents playing the records their own parents once played for them. That's part of what makes Jaafar's performance feel significant beyond the usual biopic hype cycle. He's not simply portraying a historical figure the way an actor might play a president or a general from 100 years ago. He's playing someone millions of people watched live, whose voice they can still recognize instantly, whose dance moves became a kind of shared cultural vocabulary. The bar for authenticity wasn't set by a script, it was set by decades of muscle memory in the collective public imagination. And he's doing it while carrying his own family's private grief into a very public spotlight, the same spotlight that, in some ways, never really let Michael Jackson rest even in death. So here's the question worth leaving you with. When a family member steps into a role like this, are they honoring a legacy, or are they, in some small way, still processing a loss the rest of us only observed from a distance? Maybe it's both. Maybe that's exactly the point, that this film was never just a biopic. For at least one person on that set, it was something closer to a conversation with someone he never got to say a proper goodbye to. What do you think Michael Jackson would have made of his nephew stepping into his shoes? Proud, unsettled, or maybe a little of both? Drop your thoughts, and if this kind of deep dive into the story behind the story is something you want more of, you know what to do to make sure you don't miss the next one.